Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens when you become unattainable? We're not talking about arrogance or superiority. We're talking about inner peace, the strength that comes from within, and a mind that is not easily shaken by criticism, praise, or external expectations. Michel de Montaigne, one of the greatest thinkers of the Renaissance, dedicated his life to understanding human nature. And he discovered something powerful, that true freedom only comes when you become unattainable. In this video, we'll explore what that really means and what starts to change in your life when you reach that state. Number 1, you stop being controlled by others. When you become unattainable, one of the first and most powerful transformations that happens is this: you finally stop being controlled by others. And we're not just talking about authoritarian or manipulative people, but something more subtle and profound: the constant need for approval, the fear of criticism, the desire to be accepted. Michel de Montaigne said that the greatest thing in the world is to know that you belong to yourself. And when you learn that, something changes inside you. You stop acting to please, to impress, or to fit into standards that never made sense. You start making decisions based on your truth, not on the expectations of others. Criticism that once hurt now becomes background noise, and compliments that once filled you with vanity become mere passing observations. You understand that living at the mercy of what others think is living in an invisible prison. When you free yourself from this, your presence changes. You speak less, observe more, and act with firmness. It's not rebellion, it's inner sovereignty. From that moment on, no one else has the power to control your emotions with a word, a look, or a judgment. You take the wheel of your life. And that scares those who are used to seeing you mold yourself to fit into the mold of others. Becoming unattainable is, at its core, an act of courage. It is deciding that your inner peace is worth more than any external validation. That's when you finally understand those who live to please others lose themselves, but those who find themselves become free. Number 2, your emotions no longer dominate your decisions. When you become unattainable, something subtle yet powerful begins to happen. Your emotions no longer control your decisions. This does not mean becoming a cold or insensitive person, but rather someone who feels deeply and yet chooses wisely. Michel de Montaigne, philosopher of introspection, believed that knowing oneself was the first step to mastering one's passions. And he was right. Most people act impulsively. They speak in the heat of anger, make decisions driven by fear, give up out of sadness, or indulge in pleasure without thinking about the consequences. When you are ruled by your emotions, you live like a puppet. The strings are in the hands of circumstances, people, and passing moods. But when you become unattainable, you develop a kind of inner space between what you feel and what you do, a moment of awareness. You may feel anger, but you decide not to yell. You may feel fear, but you act with courage. You may be sad, but you don't give up. This emotional mastery is one of the greatest proofs of maturity and inner strength, because emotions are inevitable. But being a slave to them is optional. The unattainable mind observes what it feels, understands, accepts, but never lets itself be carried away. You begin to make decisions with clarity, without the weight of guilt, impulsiveness, or anxiety. And that completely changes the course of your life, because decisions shape destinies. And when they are not contaminated by emotional turmoil, you finally begin to act with firmness, awareness, and truth. That is the difference between living like a leaf blown by the wind and living like a sturdy tree that feels the wind but is never knocked down by it. Number 3, the chaos of the world no longer affects you in the same way. When you become unattainable, the chaos of the world continues to exist, but it simply no longer affects you in the same way. The news continues to be alarming, people continue to complain, conflicts continue to happen, but something has changed within you. Montaigne said, "The soul that has no fixed goal is lost." And that is exactly what sets the unattainable apart from the ordinary. While most people live reacting to everything, being pulled by the tides of fear, anxiety, public opinion, and other people's problems, you begin to live with direction. When you know who you are, what you want, and why you are here, the noise outside becomes irrelevant. This does not mean indifference, it means focus. While others are distracted by scandals, gossip, and manufactured crises, you keep your attention on what really matters. What's more, you develop a calmness that destabilizes the world around you. When everyone else is running around in panic, you remain steadfast. When everyone else is at war with themselves, you radiate an almost disconcerting serenity. Chaos no longer rules you because you have learned to silence the noise inside. Your mind has become a refuge, not a battlefield, and that allows you to act much more effectively in difficult times. The unattainable does not flee from the world. It simply does not allow itself to be contaminated by it. It understands that it cannot control everything, but it can always choose how to react, and that choice, made with clarity, is what makes it rare. A beacon in the midst of a storm. While others drown in the waves of chaos, you learn to navigate them silently, firmly, and without losing your way. Number 4. You start to bother those who live on the surface. When you become unattainable, something curious happens. You start to bother people. But not because of what you say or do directly, but because of who you are. Your steadfastness is disconcerting. Your calmness irritates. Your inner freedom causes discomfort in those who are still trapped by the opinions of others, by drama, by the constant need for approval. Michel de Montaigne said, "It is a sign of greatness not to care about greatness." When you reach this state, you no longer need to show off, compete, or seek validation. And that is exactly what hurts the ego of those who still live on the surface. Your existence becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see reflected. People who live by appearances, who are shaped by trends, who change their opinions to please others, feel threatened by those who are authentic, centered, and emotionally independent. Because you prove, without saying a word, that it is possible to live differently, and that silent truth is uncomfortable. They expect you to react with anger, to seek revenge, to play the game. But you don't react, you just keep going, and that frustrates them even more. The unattainable doesn't need to win debates or gain attention. They are so focused on their internal evolution that the external becomes insignificant, and that causes many to distance themselves or attack. But it also reveals something liberating. When you bother the superficial, it's a sign that you're touching depths that few have the courage to explore. Being unattainable is a natural filter. It drives away the weak-minded and attracts those who also seek to grow in silence. And in the end, you discover that bothering others by being yourself is just more proof that you're on the right path. Number 5. You inspire respect even in silence. When you become unattainable, a silent presence begins to emanate from you, and it inspires respect without you having to say a single word. Michel de Montaigne wrote, "Words are half of what the speaker says and half of what the listener hears." But when you reach this state of inner mastery, silence speaks louder than any speech. It's a firm silence, not a passive one. A silence that comes from someone who has nothing to prove to anyone. Your posture, your calm gaze, your lack of reactivity, all of this communicates strength. And this strength, because it is contained, is even more respected. While many shout to be heard, you remain silent, and everyone pays attention. Because there is a huge difference between what is loud and what is powerful. The loud want attention. The powerful don't need it. When you become unattainable, Your calmness in the face of provocation is mistaken for superiority. Your patience in tense situations is read as coldness. Your absence in trivial conflicts is interpreted as indifference. But in reality, all of this is wisdom in disguise. The respect you inspire comes from your ability to not get lost in small battles. People realize that you are not easily shaken, that you do not justify yourself, that you do not sell yourself. This creates a field around you, a field of calm authority. You do not demand respect, you exude respect, and little by little, even those who once doubted you begin to listen to you more attentively. Not because you spoke louder, but because your silence carries a weight that few can sustain. Number 6. You become selective with your battles. When you become unattainable, you realize that not every battle is worth your energy. You become selective, not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. Michel de Montaigne said, "It is easier to endure misery than boredom." And many of the arguments, provocations, and disputes of the modern world are nothing more than that, pure boredom disguised as urgency. When you are emotionally reactive, you want to respond to everything, refute everything, prove your point at any cost. But when you reach this state of inner firmness, you learn the art of choosing where to put your voice, where to put your presence, and especially where to withdraw in silence. Emotional battles, ego conflicts, fights for power or approval, all of this becomes small. You realize that most of the confrontations people engage in have nothing to do with truth or justice, but with insecurity and neediness. And you don't get involved. Your attention turns only to what really matters, your values, your projects, your inner peace. Being selective with your battles means understanding that each reaction costs you time, focus, and energy, and that wasting it on those who don't want to understand is like watering dry soil. Nothing blooms. The unattainable know that their strength lies in restraint, not in explosion. They only go to war when the cause is worth more than the wear and tear, and that makes them even more feared, because those who fight for everything get tired. But those who choose their battles well win with little. True power is not in winning every debate, but in knowing which ones are even worth your presence. Becoming unattainable is more than a state of being. It is a profound transformation that redefines how you relate to yourself and the world. It is not about closing yourself off or isolating yourself, but about building an inner space so solid that nothing external can disturb you. It is an invitation to a new way of being, where true power does not lie in controlling others or the environment, but in mastering yourself completely. When you reach this state, you discover that time is no longer your enemy or ally, but simply a neutral backdrop against which you write your story with complete freedom. Moreover, this achievement reveals a paradoxical truth. The more unattainable you become, the more accessible you are to what really matters: authenticity, serenity, and personal fulfillment. Because what really defines your strength is not how much you resist others, but how much you allow yourself to exist without fear, without masks, without concessions, and that's when life takes on a whole new meaning. A meaning that doesn't depend on circumstances, opinions, or fleeting emotions, but on a deep connection with your own essence. This is true freedom, silent and powerful, which few achieve but everyone deserves to experience. And when you live from this place, everything around you begins to transform, not because you fight to change the world, but because the world respects those who have already become whole. Only for the determined people who stayed until the end. Of this video, comment below, "I stayed until the end." That way, I'll know who really wants to take control of their life once and for all. Take care and see you in the next video.